So James Joyce's Ulysses. We know that Ulysses is a parallel novel, or it is an adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey. We have studied Homer in our previous classes, and today we will be starting Ulysses. And as I have mentioned it now, that it is a adaptation. It is an adaptation of Homer's the great epic poem, The Odyssey. So Ulysses begins at about 8 a.m. on Thursday, June 16, 1904 in Dublin, Ireland, when one of his major participants, young Stephen Dedalus, awakens and interacts with his two housemates, the egoistical medical students Buck Mulligan and the overtly reserved English student Haynes. So in a tower building, two characters live. One of them, that is Stephen Dedalus, another Buck Mulligan, are medical students, and an English personality. His name is Haynes. So early in the morning, Stephen Dedalus is getting ready to go out, and that is in early in the morning, that is in 8 a.m. And this is the beginning of the novel Ulysses. The narrative ends some 24 hours later when Stephen, having politely refused lodging at the home of the two other principal characters, Leopard and Molly Bloom, discovers he is no longer welcome to stay with Mulligan and Haynes. During the 16 hours of narrative time, the characters move through their day in Dublin and interacting with a stunning variety of individuals, most of whom are fictional, but some of whom represent actual people. So next time, the narrative starts with the conversation of Stephen Dedalus with Leopard and Molly. And such conversation gives us an idea of Dublin life, and also such kind of fictional idea and some practical idea as well of the life in Dublin, Ireland. Ulysses stands as an inventive multi-point of view. There are 18 visions of daily events, personal attitude, cultural and political sentiment, and observation of the human condition. These are in uh, in Ulysses. You will see such kind of themes or motifs in this novel. It is written in a number of differing literary styles, ranging from internal monologue to first-person speculation to question and answer, from catechism to newspaper headlines. So through the all kinds of technique, James Joyce wanted to establish his motives. And which are the motives? That is the cultural, the political sentiment, and the observation of human life and human condition. The work has 18 chapters. When taken in context with James Joyce's grander design for it, a playful comparison to Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey, Ulysses gains complexity, irony, and dramatic intensity. So this is an adaptation of Homer's great epic poem, The Odyssey. However, Ulysses got international recognition, and for the cause of his ironic and dramatic presentation of Dublin life, the ironic and dramatic presentation of the life of Ireland, as you see through the novel. Not only does Stephen Dedalus become all the more vivid because of his comparison to Telemachus. So one comparison, that is Telemachus, son of Odysseus, has been compared to Stephen Dedalus over here in this novel Ulysses. The son of Ulysses, king of Ithaca in the Homeric epic. And the other main characters, Leopard may be seen as the wandering Ulysses. And we see another character, that is Leopard. He has been compared with Odysseus. In the Odyssey, Ulysses is seen returning to his wife, that symbol of womanly and cultural virtue, Penelope. In the novel, Joyce uses irony to represent Penelope as Molly Bloom. Why it is irony, we will take the information later on. So Penelope has been compared with Molly Bloom, and you can you hear me? Sorry. Okay, nice. So Leopard has been compared with Odyssey. That means Leopard has played the role Ulysses, as we have known that Ulysses is the Latin name of the great hero Odysseus, and Molly Bloom has been in parallel to the virtual and the final wife Penelope, who that very afternoon had an adulterous encounter with her lover Blaise Bolian. Okay, we have perceived that Penelope was very much loyal to her husband, and she didn't have any physical contact with somebody else through the 20 years. And Penelope becomes an epitome of loyalty, physical and also the mental loyal to her husband. However, we see in Ulysses, we see a character that Molly Bloom has been compared and has been set parallel to Penelope. And in the very afternoon of the incidents of the novel, we see that Molly Bloom was having physical relationship with uh, her lover Blaise Bolion. So we see a contradiction and complexity. So in which way? And in which way? So in one hand, we see the story of the great epic poem Odysseus, and in another hand, we see the history of several doublet characters that has been compared with the name of uh, the great poem Odyssey. However, the attitude we see by Ulysses, Stephen Dedalus, and Molly Bloom are totally complex, are totally full of complexity and irony and dramatic situation, as you see. Incidents in the novel have counterparts in the Homeric epic, sometimes to a broadly farcical effect, other times to a more punning or humorous effect. Punning, that means the play with words, a word having two meanings. So in such a style, that means lie to lie down, that means, and lie also means uh, to tell a lie. So such kind of playing with words has also been employed by James Joyce in his novel. And still others to fit Joyce's own sense of social and political irony. So we can say that it is a social and political irony. As when we have been discussing the biography of James Joyce, we have said that the politics of the Ireland was not liked by uh, uh, James Joyce, and it is highly likely that James Joyce left Dublin and went to Switzerland and Paris for living. That James Joyce was not in a positive mood that Dublin and Ireland will be good in politically and socially, because they are not respectful towards the politics and the social and the religious perspectives happening and the scholars of Ireland. And for this reason, Ulysses is a social and the political irony. So in one hand, we see the great situation of the Odyssey, but we see the very contradictory and the negative situation that's happening in the novel Ulysses. Refer to a Telemachus. For instance, on chapter 1 in Ulysses, refer to a Telemachus by Joyce, establishes the link to come between Stephen Dedalus and the Leopard bloom. It shows Stephen getting up and leaving for work. So through those familiar with the Odyssey will be amused by the parallels between malignance and heinous and the sweeters of Penelope. So early in this novel, Stephen Dedalus is getting ready to go to his working place. That means he works in a school. And initially, he is talking with his two flatmates, that is heinous and malignant. And this heinous and malignance has been compared with Penelope's more than 100 suitors. Okay. So very farcical parallelism we see in this novel. In the Odyssey, the Telemachus, son of Ulysses, king of Ithaca, is persuaded to pursue out in search of his long absent father. Chapter 2, 3 of the Odyssey show Telemachus meeting Nestor, an old windbag of a counselor of his father. And in the novel, Stephen is shown in conversation with Mr. DSC, headmaster of the school where he teaches. In addition to being anti-Semitic, anti-feminist, and wildly pro-British, Mr. DSC is a repository of misinformation. So this very character, Mr. DSC, has been compared with the great character of Odyssey, that is the Nestor. Nestor has been compared the windbag and the first friend and the well-wisher of Odysseus, the great hero. And this Nestor has been compared to this man who is very much anti-Semitic, who is very much anti-feminist, and also he had some information that is the wrong. And such kind of character has been compared with the great character Nestor of Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, the first 3 episodes of Ulysses focus on Stephen Dedalus. As you see, the first 3 books of the Odyssey have been dedicated to Telemachus. In the same way, Stephen Dedalus, a problematically autobiographical character, first introduced to in Joyce's published work through portrait of the artist as a young man. So it can be claimed a little bit, or in some way, that Stephen Dedalus is as similar as the temperament of James Joyce himself. So that's a different discussion. And then we see that Stephen Dedalus is a character in the portrait of the artist as a young man. In chapter 1, Stephen, malignant and heinous, prepares for the day. In chapter 2, Stephen is teaching in a boys' school. While in the class, recite Milton's Lycidias. He brags about his life so far, his ambitions to be a great writer, and his doubts. So James Joyce, Stephen Dedalus teaches in a school where the students are very much inattentive. However, James Joyce brags about life so far at the time of his taking class or staying in the school. James Joyce becomes a visionary, and he visions, that means Stephen Dedalus visions to be a great writer in his life, and that is his motive. In chapter 3, Stephen walks along the seafront and reflect upon the things he sees: midwives, couples, couples speakers, boulders, a dog, the body of a dog, she's pond, and the she's wreck. So he was walking, Stephen Dedalus was walking, and simultaneously he was thinking about the many uh, things, detail of uh, of Dublin's life. The next 12th chapter take the reader to Leopard Bloom's Odyssey. Leopard Bloom's, as I have mentioned it earlier, that Leopard Bloom's have been considered with Odyssey, the wanderings of Odysseus, wandering of Ulysses. His and Stephen's path cross, but they have no meaningful meeting until later on. So, Stephen Dedalus is walking to Dublin, and he went to beach, and there he passed some time. And what Stephen Dedalus will also be going to some other places. At the same time, Bloom will also be going or wandering. It has been compared with Odysseus' wandering or Ulysses' wandering in Ulysses, that he will also be wandering, though wandering within the Dublin city. They will cross, but their crossing will be meaningful next time. The chapter 4, Leopard Bloom is at his and Molly's home at 7 Ackles Street in the northwest quadrant of Dublin. He is preparing breakfast for himself and his wife and his cat. So in chapter 4, we meet with our wandering character Ulysses, and he is preparing breakfast for himself, for his wife, and also their cat as well, before departing the Paddy Dignam's funeral. The jingling springs of the bed upstairs shows that his wife Molly is awake. He goes out into the world like Odysseus, the Odyssey. Bloom's wanderings become the major part of the novel. So we see that early in the morning, our character, wandering character, Ulysses had been, Ulysses, that means Leopard Bloom had been preparing his breakfast and his wife, and then he left to attend a funeral of a person called Paddy Dignams, and such kind of journey for attending the funeral has been compared with the wanderings of Ulysses in this novel. In chapter 5, Bloom walks through the streets of the Dublin and performs several errands. In chapter 6, Bloom and his fellow mourners, that means travel in the to the cemetery for the burial of Paddy Dignam, which evokes from Bloom a wealth of meditation on birth. So actually, what happens to us, that is whenever we attend the funeral of someone of our close relation, that we becomes retrospective. We think of about our life and death. In the same way, at the time of attending the funeral of Paddy Dignam, Bloom started to meditating. That means thinking with deep attention on birth of human being, death of human being, and the human frailty, including his reminiscence on Rudy, his own dead son, and his father, and suicide. And the theme and an anti-Semitic Semitism technically arise in various conversation with Bloom, the target. So we see that such kind of meditative theme has been incorporated in the novel Ulysses very tactlessly. Uh, so in chapter 7, Stephen Bloom, father and son, or Odysseus and Telemachus, met in the newspaper office for the first time in the novel. Uh, meet. Although each knows who is the other is, Bloom attempts unsuccessfully to complete an advertising contract, and Stephen successfully hands over the letter schoolmaster DSA entrusted him with. Note the shift in narrative as newspaper headlines appear to interrupt straightforward narrative. So this is the first time Stephen Devdelas and the Bloom, that means the Leopard Bloom, met. And as we have uh, understood that Stephen Dedalus and the Bloom is not actual father and son. However, they met accidentally, and this Bloom has been compared with Odysseus, and Stephen Dedalus has been compared with Telemachus. So, such meeting, this meeting has been compared with the meeting of Telemachus and Odysseus in the great epic poem Odyssey. In chapter 8, Bloom gets hungry and decides to lunch at Heavy Furnace Pub. The dominant motives are related to food and eating. Bloom continues to wonder, thinking about birth and family life, Molly and her previous lovers, and her own and his own past. Okay, so here again and again, James Joyce is trying to push his motive of this novel. So, and another motive, that is fooding and eating. So Bloom continues to wonder and thinking about the birth, life, and his Molly, her previous lover, and her own past. He is handed a religious pamphlet and sees Stephen's sister Dilly in the street. Feeds some seagull with cakes he has purchased. Then he starts nourishing and thinking about advertising. Bloom meets Mrs. Breen, shot of an old flame, and sympathizes with her because of her cracked husband. He had earlier sympathized with women's lot in general when thinking about family's life with a hard labor, and he learns that a mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Purefoy, is in the maternity hospital. So, Leopard Bloom, through his uh, through his uh, contract with several characters of Dublin life, we see the attitude, the social attitude, how we feel and how we think about the social life of Dublin, Ireland. And we see a woman whose husband is cracked, is very much mad, and also we see that our main character, that means Leopard Bloom, is pondering, is thinking deeply about the meaning of life, and he also perceived that women's life is full of labor. They have to do um, some some um, labor job, staying home. So that is the James Joyce's attitude to womanhood. In chapter 9, at the National Library, in the office of the director, Stephen A.E., that is the pseudonym of the noted Irishman of letters, George Russell, George Ellington, and Lister, the librarian, discusses Shakespeare. The other mock Stephen of his youthful enthusiasm of complex theories of the literary creation. A is the Platonist or idealist and the mocks all readings of Shakespeare that suppose that Hamlet is a real person. After some banters about the Dublin literary, A.E. leaps and Stephen begins to expound his theory. It is a theory that must chart a course between the idealism of A.E. and the simple-minded literary approach of Mulligan in order to define the ways in which art and the life interact. So the visionary theory of Stephen Dedalus mix up art with life. So life, uh, arts for art's sake and art for life's sake. It's not, that is life for art's sake. So such kind of interaction we see in this novel as well. Chapter 10 takes place at about 3 p.m. on the streets of Dublin. It's made up of 18 small episodes. So this 10 episode chapter consisted of 10 episodes And that episode, that kind of episodes can be compared with epic digression. So which makes a sort of doubling of the book itself, which has 18 chapters. In this mini mini episode, we meet uh, Father Conmy, the Daedalus sisters, Stephens, who and a one-legged sailor and an arm that throws a coin and belongs to Molly Bloom. We also met Blaise Bolin, a host of other characters. So in this chapter, we see uh, some notable characters, and it is a lengthy chapter of this novel because this chapter incorporates 18 other episodes, or in other terms, can be compared with the digression of epic poem. And so this is a very lengthy book. The chapter 11, it is about 4 p.m. in the afternoon, nearly time of the Bolians as a assignation with Molly. We are at the concert room saloon in a posh Ormond hotel. The barmaid at the Ormond hotel, see Bloom pass by. Simon Daedalus, Stephen's father, is there. So, uh, and he turns his attention to the piano. So, Stephen Daedalus' father's name is Simon Daedalus, and he is here in this Ormond hotel, which had just been turned by the blind stripling. Bloom is elsewhere buying paper. Bolian enters. Bloom sports his car outside, stops his car outside, and also enters with a friend. Richie Golding, Bolian lives on his way to meet Molly. Simon sings, and Bloom thinks of Molly. So Bloom thinks of Molly. Simon, that means Simon Daedalus. Sings the piano, and there our character who start their journey in search for his father, Stephen Daedalus, meets his father, Simon Daedalus. But actually, James Joyce has compared uh, Odysseus with Ulysses, that means Leopard Bloom. In chapter 12, it is nearly 5 p.m. and the local shift of Barney Pictionary pubs where Bloom is going to meet Martin Cunningham and discusses the affairs to the Dignam family. The unnamed narrator, a date character, chats with Joe Hines and other, meet the citizen, a fierce nationalist with a dog called Kerry and who doesn't take kindly to Bloom. Several characters enters the pub, including Bloom. Behind those back, the citizen starts throwing insults. So this is chapter 12. Chapter 13 takes place at 8 p.m. Cheesy Shepherd and her twin brothers and her friends Eddie Broadbent, Grady McDowell, who sits a little apart, are on the sandy mound stand. Grady is impatient with the boys and their noise and the mess, as well as her friends, who are a little common, and she dreams at length about herself and her romantic aspiration and her spiritual strivings. The twins kick the ball to Bloom, and who is also on the beach, and Barty webs him into her thoughts. She notices that he is in mourning and constructs a tragic but romantic tale around him. And Chiji cockily goes on to ask Bloom the time, but his watch has stopped. So Leopard Bloom is interacting with so many characters of Dublin's life. She knocks the man and can be excited by the immodest woman, and she is allowing Bloom to see up her skirt. And when she leaves, Bloom notices that she has a limp. And uh, this is where chapter 13. In chapter 14, at about 10 p.m., Bloom enters the National Maternity Hospital to check on the condition of Mina Purefoy, who is who is going to give birth the child, who went into the labor in chapter 8 to reinforce the theme of childbearing. So another theme or motif we see in this novel, that is the theme of childbearing. Joyce delivers a running analogy between the development of the English language and the gestation of an infant. While at the hospital, Bloom sees Stephen carousing with other young men and what is and doing so will spill and what's the state of his talent. So Bloom went to the maternity hospital to see a character, and there he discussed about the theme of childbearing. And we, at that time, our character Stephen Daedalus has been making enjoyment in the same hospital that we have noticed. In chapter 15, in the midnight of Bella, Cohen's brothel to Tornin Street. This chapter is a series of fantastic events, particularly partially the result of the drunkenness of the Stephen's past. So Stephen is very much visionary, and through the character of visionary as well, James Joyce tried to exhibit the life of social and the political life of Ireland, particularly due to the hallucination in induced by guilt and remorse on Bloom's part. Stephen and Leon Strigan in drunk and are mocked by the hangers on and the patrons of the place. Bloom follows events and the characters. Gati, Molly, his father and his mother, stimulating his mind and sense of guilt of hallucinatory fashion. Bloom is arrested for committing an unnamed nuisance and undergoes a protected trial in which he never knows for certain what the charges are. His identity constantly changes as characters from his past and personification of perverse desires into the court. Bloom speaks with one of the hosts, Joe Higgins, and who knows where Stephen is. So we are nearly finished. When Blooms find him, Stephen is drunkenness, is attempting to steal his settle his bill. Bloom ensures that he isn't cheated. The ghost of the Stephen's mother appears. Stephen breaks the chandelier, and they enter on the street. A fight with some English privates. He has allegedly insulted the king. Leaves Stephen prostrate on the pavement. The police appear, but only clean here, and Bloom smooth things over. Bloom gazes at the unconscious Stephen and experiences a vision of his dead son. So noticing um, towards towards Stephen Daedalus, Bloom thought about his own son Rudy. The remaining three chapters may be seen as Ulysses' homecoming to Ithaca. This segment covered the following events of the Ulysses: the hero's return, the slaying of the treacherous suitors of his faithful wife Penelope, and his joyful reunion with her. So in chapter 16, it is 1 a.m. at the captain's shelter. Bloom and Stephen drink coffee. A number of minor characters appears, and Stephen and Bloom interact with them. Bloom shows Stephen a photograph of Molly. The implication being, Stephen's talents might be used to further Molly's career. They leave uh, and discuss music as they walk. In chapter 17, it is 2 p.m. in the morning at the Bloom's home at 7 Eccles Street. The narrative style is in the dry question and answer style of the catechism. Stephen and the Bloom are brought together for the last time here. Stephen shakes a father, Bloom shakes a son. At the same time, each of them is individual, yet harmoniously joined. In the next, they are united by a word play, becoming Stum and Blefen. But their union and reconciliation is ephemeral. They urinate in the garden. Bloom invites Stephen to stay. Stephen declines and leaves. In chapter 18, called Molly's soliloquy. Molly is in the bed, just on the cusp of her sleep. The entire chapter is from Molly's point of view, revealing Molly's thought. She is thinking about her husband, her meeting with Bolian earlier in the day in that very bed. Her hopes. Among other things, she suspects Bloom of having an affair. She thinks of women's lot in the games of courting and mating. She thinks of her lovers and she longs for a glamorous life. She thinks of beauty and ugliness, and her thoughts are interpreted by her trained whistle. So thinks of her past life in uh, Gibraltar and laments the dampness of her present. She thinks about her health and her daughter. She thinks about her visit to the doctor and muses about Stephen. Her thoughts turn to Rudy and Bloom. She thinks of humiliating her husband. She recalls the time when she and Bloom has made love. Letting the character reader see, she clearly prefers Bloom to Bolian. Punctuation, selection, comments, things usually associated with authorial controls are missing. So the familiar with Odyssey, those familiar with the Odyssey will see the ironic comparison between Molly Bloom and with Penelope, who uses her knowledge of construction of hearts and the Ulysses bid to confirm the identity of her long absent husband. The chapter begins and ends with the affirmative yes. And the yeses represent Molly's ongoing optimism to life in general, punctuating the choices she has made and the memories she had revisited during the entire soliloquy. And the yeses also represent Joyce's belief and the women are a positive life force. A notion, that is a notion he was at pains to demonstrate in the remarkable soliloquy. The key here is to found in Molly's ultimate decision to serve Bloom breakfast in bed tomorrow. So that is the uh, story of Ulysses, the novel written by Joyce. It is a parallelism, and it's a comparison or an adaptation of epic poem, the Odyssey. We see some character parallel to the epic poem, the Odyssey. However, through such kind of contradictory parallelism, uh, James Joyce, Jeff Joyce wanted to present the Dublin life, uh, social social and political life ironically in this novel. So thank you very much.